Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14, our concluding episode for 2020. What an amazing year and so many levels, and we're so grateful, Kathy and I and the whole team at the Fair Housing Institute, that you have been such a great support of this channel, and we look forward to 2021. Well, there'll be a lot more to come, some great things on the horizon for this channel and for fair housing education. So for today, we thought it would be appropriate for us to really dig into what were some highlights of 2020. And then Kathy's going to give us some feedback on what we should prepare for 2021. So Kathy, welcome again to our show.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's hard to believe that we are almost through 2020. And boy, am I looking forward to 2021. So it'll be good to talk a little bit about what we think we see coming around the corner in the new year for our fair housing community.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So please give us a thumbs up. We always appreciate when you do that. It helps create awareness for this complimentary fair housing education channel. And we appreciate those who have also subscribed to the channel. So let's get into our topic. So our first one that we want to get into, which was a fair housing main item for 2020, was the Supreme Court ruling on gender. And so we're going to dive into like what that was for a minute in our scene, give you a summary, and then Kathy will look forward to your feedback on what we should prepare for, what this Supreme Court ruling, what we can anticipate when it comes to fair housing moving forward. So let's take a look at our scene.
The basic premise of the Bostock decision is that an employer who fires an employee because the employee is gay or transgender violates Title VII protections because the termination is based at least in part on sex. The court defines sex as referring only to the biological distinctions between male and female and then applies a but for causation analysis. Under this analysis, the court examines whether the outcome would have happened but for the sex of the employee. The court considers the example of an employer with two employees, both of whom are attracted to men. If the employees are basically the same in all respects, except one is a man and the other is a woman, and the employer fires the man because he is attracted to men, the termination is based upon a trait, attraction to males, that is permitted in female employees but not males. Therefore, the court reasons the employee is being fired at least in part because of his sex. The court applies another example for explaining how sex is a factor in cases involving gender identity, in which an employer has two otherwise identical employees, both of who identify as female, and fires one because that employee identified as male at birth. The court reviews past Title VII decisions for its conclusion that Title VII prohibits employment actions where changing the employee's sex would have yielded a different choice by the employer.
This case, Jonathan, I think is going to take a year or 2 years to happen in the world of fair housing. And I think there's going to be a lot of fair housing advocacy agencies and organizations out there looking to make a case to make sure everyone is aware that this equal employment Supreme Court case also is going to impact the definition of sex under the Fair Housing Act. Mm-hmm. So for those properties out there who are in areas that perhaps weren't covered by a state or local law that protected people based on sexual orientation or gender identity, I think they should be looking for testers who are out there to find out if there is housing discrimination in those areas, because they're going to want to bring this case. So even if you haven't dealt with this in your training or in your in-house training in the past, It's time you do it now. Be prepared so that you don't make a wrong answer in a test when it comes to people who are now protected based on their gender identity and sexual orientation.
Very good. Thank you for that feedback, Kathy. Yeah, lots to look on the horizon and make sure that we're prepared for. So that brings us to our second item that we were keeping an eye on for 2020 and need to know what to do about it for 2021. And that has to do with the screening policies and using artificial intelligence. And so using software as an assist for our screening policies. So let's take a look at this scene. And Kathy, we'll get your feedback on what property management companies need to pay attention to.
I'm sorry, your application has been rejected. You do not comply with our policies for residents. You are a criminal. Goodbye.
The last year or two was active in the area of fair housing enforcement against some very large companies such as Google and Facebook, and companies that did roommate screening and matching. So I think the general takeaway for what we can expect into the next year is that if you're going to use a third party to do either marketing or screening, you need to be aware that neither of those actions gets a housing provider off the hook for how they do those activities, such as marketing and screening, that it's always going to be the housing provider and its policies that could get challenged in a fair housing action. And now, to expand upon that, we now have to add those marketing companies and those screening companies and their algorithms that they use to do those activities. Now those are going to be challenged under the Fair Housing Act, and we'll have to watch carefully to see how those cases come out. The cases have now been out there. Right. And now we're going to be seeing some decisions on those cases over the next year or two. So I'm going to be looking at that very closely.
Very good. Thank you, Kathy. So takeaway, don't be dependent on your software solutions. Make sure that you are fair housing compliant. So thank you for that takeaway for 2021, Kathy. So that leads us to our third item that we were paying attention to for 2020, and that was assistance animals and HUD's notice regarding assistance animals. So let's take a look at this clip and we'll get your feedback, Kathy.
While COVID was certainly the main headline for 2020, HUD's notice on assistance animals was news to pay attention to for housing providers and property management companies. As property management pros, we need to know the difference between the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are times when we have to be clear about why we are asking for a verification for the assistance animal. The notice also made it clear that going online and getting your pet registered or certified on some website by paying money is irrelevant to the question of whether this is an assistance animal that should be approved to live in housing as a reasonable accommodation. If someone hands you one of these registrations or online certifications, you can hand it back to the resident and let them know that it is not adequate to verify their need for an assistance animal.
Well, doesn't it seem like we always have to talk about assistance animals?
For sure.
And the truth of the matter is we do. And we're going to have to keep talking about it because it is a topic that seems to strike every property that I ever talk to with kind of some confusion, kind of some frustration. And always wondering if this is an area of the law that is being abused by people because they want their pet and their pet is outside the restrictions of your pet policy, or they want their pet but they don't want to pay your pet rent. And so they want it to be known as an assistance animal. And you're always wondering, is it really that or just a pet?
Mhm.
And that's not going to change. I think what we will see in 2021 is we're going to see the HUD notice that came out in 2020 referred to more. So I think there will be some cases that will refer to HUD's notice. HUD's notice is not law, but a lot of times courts do refer to agency guidance like that in making their decisions. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the courts do with applying or not applying particular areas of the HUD notice, because I found some of them to be odd, some of them to be kind of disturbing,
Mhm.
and others to be helpful for housing providers. So we'll see how that comes out, and I'm going to be looking forward to that.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with you. Assistance animals, out of all of the feedback we've received from our community, was questions regarding this scenario, that scenario. It was one of the biggest topics that we heard from our community. So thank you for your feedback on that, Kathy, and we'll see what 2021 brings along that subject for sure.
You know, Jonathan, I want to add one more thing too.
Sure.
Is more and more states are coming out with their own statutes about emotional support animals. And I think that is a trend that hopefully will continue, because sometimes those state statutes do give housing providers more guidance about what is legal and what is illegal when residents are claiming to have emotional support animals.
Okay.
So I think and I hope that we get more of those state statutes in the next year as well.
Excellent point. Yeah. Keep our eyes out for those. So thank you for adding that, Kathy. Beautiful. So that leads us to our fourth item. And we know it was the biggest headline of 2020, unfortunately, as we continue to think of all those affected by it. And that's COVID-19 and the effect that that had on the housing industry. And we are so grateful as an industry how much we've rallied together to support and help each other through this terrible pandemic and crisis. But Kathy, let's look at our scene here, and we'll get your take on how that affected the industry and what we can see for 2021.
HUD issued a notice titled HUD Statement on Fair Housing and COVID-19. The first is that fair housing requirements and the government's enforcement of fair housing will continue during and after the COVID-19 crisis has passed. HUD's statement reminds us that we need to guard against irrational blame that fuels discrimination and harassment against people who, because of racial and ethnic profiling, are perceived to be associated with this disease. Federal, state, and local fair housing laws prohibit targeting persons in housing because of their race, national origin, or other protected category due to their association with COVID-19. For example, if a housing provider views it more likely that Asian applicants may have COVID-19 and because of the incorrect view denies an Asian's application for housing, this would be a clear violation of all fair housing laws. Another example is if other residents harass and intimidate a resident due to their perceived association with the virus, the housing provider is required by the Fair Housing Act to make such harassment stop. HUD's statement reminds us that fear often translates into discrimination, including harassment. Housing providers must be vigilant to prevent what is already a very difficult situation from becoming worse due to discriminatory attitudes and actions by staff members or neighbors.
You know, this has been a tough year. It's been a tough year for all of us, and I know it's been a tough year for all of our members of our fair housing community out there. So, you know, I think we'll see some legal issues that'll continue, and I'm sure we'll be back on the air next year to talk about some of the results of some of the legal issues involving the pandemic and reasonable accommodation, and whether having had COVID is a disability or not. I think we'll continue to see those type of things developing as we see more cases and as we see more situations that come to light. And we'll deal with that then. I think in the meantime, we need to be sure that we're doing a good job with communication between management companies and residents, and management companies and employees, and keeping documents of those kind of communications just in case you need them in the future. And other than that, I just want to say that I have been amazed at the effort that I have seen my clients take, and I have seen all of you take, to keep your residents as safe as possible under the constraints you have, and your employees, to keep them safe as well. And I sure do admire those efforts, and I know it has not been easy for any of you. And I hope you'll continue those efforts during the next year, and that we'll all be better at doing all of this next year, because we'll have more experience and we'll have more understanding of what the issues are. And I look forward to working with you next year to get a better handle on these fair housing issues that have arisen from COVID-19. And we will be here with you through all of it.
Yeah, amen to all of that, Kathy. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a challenging year with the COVID topic, but huge. Let's clap, wave our hands, give each other virtual hugs. Well done. This industry has shown its resilience again. We've gone through so many challenges over the years, and this one will be for the record books. So I echo your emotion there, Kathy, to all of our customers, all of those in the industry listening to this program. Well done, and keep up the good work for 2021. Be vigilant and be on the lookout for changes and developments when it comes to COVID-19, and keep each other safe. So yeah, thank you for those thoughts, and we looking forward to a brighter 2021 for sure. So that brings us to our final topic, Kathy, one that really gets into more of a discussion between you and I, and just briefly on what have you seen from a training perspective when it comes to fair housing. How well have you seen people embrace online training, in-person training, the importance behind fair housing training, and what encouragement would you give to all those listening to our show for 2021?
Well, Jonathan, I think we can't talk about fair housing without also talking about training. Way back when, and I've been doing this for so many years, fair housing training was about doing the right thing, and it was about being consistent and being a good person, and obviously not intentionally discriminating against anyone. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten so much more complicated than that now. So I think when we look at training and fair housing compliance, we have to look at how a housing provider puts together a program that makes sense for that kind of housing and for the various levels of expertise that its employees have. So some employees are fairly new and may not have a lot of fair housing education. Other employees have been around a while and they're probably sick of fair housing education. So we need to come up with a training program that addresses both the needs of new employees, more seasoned employees. And one way you do that is by mixing up the training a little bit, having what we call live training. And I think this year, what we've decided is we can do virtual training in what maybe we would have done live training in the past. And I think we've come up with ways of doing that are effective and that get the point across to employees. There's online training, which of course the Fair Housing Institute has a lot of, and that is really picking up steam now. I think we're finding ways of creating online training that is more interesting, more educational, than maybe it has been in the past. And we work hard on that at the Fair Housing Institute. We're going to continue to work hard on that because we want employees to be trained, not just so they can check it off that they've been trained. We want them to be trained in a way that gets the point across, that there are ways of best practices to avoid fair housing problems. And there are also ways of handling fair housing problems if and when they occur. So training needs to address all of those things. It cannot be too simplistic because this area of the law is more complicated in 2020 and will be more complicated in 2021 than it was 10 years ago even. So fair housing training needs to address current topics as well as the basic topics, and it needs to be done consistently in a way that the employees get it, that they understand it, and then they can perform it in their daily working job, in their duties that they have. So fair housing training is not a simple topic anymore, and that's why we wanted to address it at the end of this year, so that hopefully when you are thinking about your individual training and if you are one of your corporate executives, that you're thinking about how to make sure we train people in a way that gets the points across. And maybe one way of doing that is periodically checking in with them with a quick quiz to see if they got the knowledge and the training and if they're retaining it and can then give it back and answer correctly on some quick quizzes that you might give your employees throughout the year. But I think there's a lot of ways of doing this. I hope you'll keep being creative. We're going to keep being creative on how we create these courses for you. And so, when just to kind of bring it to a close, I certainly do appreciate that you all are being with us in our fair housing community, that hopefully you're getting something out of all these various things we're doing to try to get that message and that education across. And to you from us here in the Fair Housing Institute, out to all of you in our fair housing community, we sure do wish you happy holidays and a very exciting and hopefully very productive new year.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Kathy. We have nice way to wrap up 2020 with those reminders and looking forward to 2021. And, and keep in mind, just to kind of add to some of your thoughts, Kathy, it's so important the way our brain works, that we have this variety. We have online, we have virtual training, we have this Fair Housing Institute channel as educational tools, and our social, there's so many different things that are there. And the reason why is we only retain so much. It doesn't matter if we are the most perfect teacher in the world of fair housing, there's still our ability to retain. We only have so much that we can take in at a time. So continuous training is super important. And even down to the housing sector too. There's so many unique variables within student housing or senior housing, affordable housing. Those are all different housing sectors that need unique training as well, beyond just the basics of fair housing. So, thank you for those sentiments. And I echo what Kathy says. Great year. Challenges, we've covered them. 2021, rah. Let's go into 2021 with all of that enthusiasm. And we thank you so much for your support, and more to come. A lot more episodes for 2021. Remember to give us a thumbs up. Thank you again for subscribing to our channel, and we'll see you in 2021. Thanks, everyone.